Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is David Novak. This morning I finished the Lumumba plot by Stuart Reid, and I would like to talk about it a little bit. I first heard about the book from Brian at Bookish, and I'm suspecting he did a review of the book, and so if I find that, I will put a link in the description box below. I'm not going to review the book by any means, but I would like to talk about it a little bit. It's a big book, and so I have to figure out where I am going to store the book. And while I was looking at my available space, I decided to pull down all of my other books that relate to Patrice Lumumba and to the Congo at the time of the independence movement. I left in their places certain corollary materials, such as biographies of Dag Hammarskjöld or his book Markings, which is a very nice compilation of meditations, if you will. He was a literary man. He gets good play in this book, as do all of the other figures that were relevant at the time. It's a pretty masterful timeline that Reid gives you. What I really liked about it was that all of the characters, Larry Devlin, Mobutu, Joseph, I think at that time, he later changed it, are all introduced right at the beginning. And so you follow everybody almost in parallel. And then as their paths intertwine with Patrice Lumumba's, then of course you get the whole history. So it really is a nicely woven history of the period, and I would recommend it highly as a place to start, with the caveat that figures such as Mobutu and Larry Devlin come off almost quite positively, at least at the beginning stages of the book. And Lumumba himself is treated as almost a crazy lunatic, somewhat. At least that aspect of the way he was portrayed by white forces in the region is certainly emphasized in this book. It is not a hagiographic approach to Lumumba by any means. But that said, for a timeline of the events, it really was good, and it helped me to assimilate material that I was not sure about. Now, I have read other things about Lumumba. Well, many years ago, I read this book, and it inspired me to want to write a play about the Congo history. A big undertaking. In 2004, I wrote a play about Jomo Kenyatta in Kenya, dealing with his trial before his imprisonment. And until that time, I had not given a thought to colonialism, what it meant. And so that project entailed some research, entailed a good amount of research, and I did it, and I wrote the play, and I was happy. The play that I envisioned based off of this would have been a bigger play, possibly a multi-part play. And I never really got the project to coalesce. Part of the problem was I was never able to do the necessary research. I did slowly read bits and pieces here and there, dribs and drabs, as I think he uses that phrase in one of the chapters. Something happened by dribs and drabs, and that was I would have books come in that I was able to find, and the scope of my proposed play was the entirety of the Congo story, from perhaps the Berlin Conference, which divided Africa as spoils amongst the European powers in their subsequent scramble. Now, Leopold got as his prize the Congo, which he renamed the Congo Free State. There was also a section that went to France, but it was his personal domain. And then he extracted great wealth from the region at great cost. And I felt that all of this would be worthy subjects for a play, possibly along the lines of what I had done about Kenyatta. The research proved too much for me. I famously am not a very good reader. I am improving, and alas, now that I am getting my reading up to snuff, I am at a point where I have quit writing. In fact, the one activity is almost dependent upon the other. It's still feasible that I might decide to write a play or plays in the future. I'm leaving that option open. As far as my primary activity, poetry, I have ceased, and any sort of prose writing, which I might have done, I have ceased. I will keep the possibility of plays open because it's just unfinished business for me. There were at least 3 plays that I had wanted to write that entailed more research than I could handle, and I abandoned all 3 of them. They were at different times, of course. One was something to do with the German General Rommel. I don't know what it was that inspired me to want to learn about his story. But of course, I was hampered in, in all 3 cases, I was hampered in not being able to find possibly adequate research materials. I'm sure there's a lot on Rommel, but I wasn't quite sure what I needed. But the other hampering factor was not really having any clear conception in my mind of how I would frame the story or the play that I would propose to write. The play that I did about Kenyatta being set in his trial was sort of a natural vehicle. But for none of these others did I ever figure out what I wanted to do. So the second proposed project was the Congo piece, and that would have been, as I say, a multi-partite extravaganza if I could have pulled it off. Of course, I never did, and perhaps most likely never will. And then the third was the Chicago story of Fred Hampton, an activist who was murdered by Chicago police. And in fact, let me just show you this. Finishing the Lumumba book, I decided to order this book. It is the only book as yet written about the case of Fred Hampton. And this is a revised and updated edition. I read the first book years ago, and I just, while I was reading Lumumba's story, I just found myself burning with rage periodically, and I thought, well, whatever. I at least should come up to speed on the latest information about the Fred Hampton story as well. Now, this book, when I read it the first time, did not entirely satisfy me. It's something of a memoir of Jeffrey Haas, and he covers all of the salient parts, but it was nowhere sort of the clinical dissection of all facets of the case that I would have liked. And to this date, I don't believe any have been done. And when it comes down to it, getting information about Fred Hampton continues to be very difficult. I tried to get certain things from the Chicago Public Library, but I was hamstrung in my efforts just by the lack of availability. This was sometime before the 50th anniversary of his murder. Of course, none of the parties responsible ever had to face a lick of justice, as we would say. And to this day, I would like to treat of Fred Hampton's story in a play. But again, it would be a question of how would I frame the story. It's not my place to tell his story, just as it would not be my place to tell Patrice Lumumba's story. However, the story of colonialism and the story of, as we would say now, white supremacy is a story which I have every prerogative to tell. And so given the right framing, it is something yet that I would like to do. Now, both for Fred and Patrice, if their ghosts don't mind my being so familiar, a few years ago I did a book of poems which comes under the title of Sheetrock Tabernacle. And even at that time, I knew that my poetry career was winding down, and so I purposely included poems about each of these figures because I wanted to make use of some of the knowledge that I already had gained in the efforts to research these disparate play projects which never came off the ground. So I didn't want that little bit of knowledge to go to waste. So I included them in Sheetrock Tabernacle. If I think of it, I'll put a link to my Lulu page and you can find it there. So I don't know if I'm going to read about Fred Hampton next. As I say, I've already read this book. I will surely read the new introduction and then possibly leave it there. Now I want to get into talking about the book that I just finished. So without further hemming and hawing, let me do that. Let me, in fact, read you a little bit. Somewhere in the 70s, the U.S. Senate, I believe, or Congress, decided to do an investigation into what exactly happened in the Congo, including the assassination of Patrice Lumumba. And this paragraph, I think, gives a good summation of Stuart A. Reid's book. It was known as the Church Committee. Contrary to the committee's conclusion, the United States did have blood on its hands in this instance. It had played a role in every event leading up to Lumumba's downfall and death. As early as the beginning of August 1960, 5 weeks into Lumumba's tenure as prime minister, the CIA urged President Kasavubu to remove him from power, and CIA-funded protests and propaganda made it easier for Kasavubu to do just that in September. The agency encouraged Mobutu to take power that same month, financed him and other members of his illegal regime, recommended that he arrange for Lumumba's permanent disposal, and prevented a compromise in the making that would have seen the deposed prime minister return to power. Although the CIA had failed to penetrate Lumumba's entourage while he was under house arrest, it helped Mobutu search for and eventually capture him following his escape, and then did nothing to ensure that his captors treated him humanely. When Devlin learned that Lumumba was about to be sent to his death, He offered no dissent to the Congolese power brokers who regularly sought and followed his advice. Instead, he actively kept officials in Washington out of the loop to prevent them from acting to save Lumumba. The findings of the Church Committee led to an executive order that, at least on paper, banned the U.S. government from partaking in political assassination, but it caused no broader rethinking of U.S. foreign policy. That is the overall or the overriding theme of the Lumumba plot. I should just mention as a side note, I pulled down these books to show you, and they are what I have accessible up here. I have other books down in the storage in the basement, and it occurred to me that I do have Larry Devlin's book, but I didn't pull it, so it must be down there. I've read that one. Some of these I've read and haven't. So let me go on with quoting Reid. He refers to Thomas Kanza, whose book largely informed my own view of its subject. Yeah, in fact, I have it here somewhere. Where are you? This is my absolute favorite book. Now, this is the first edition. He revised and expanded it. I never bought the revised expanded edition. This is a lovely old penguin because available copies were too pricey. I got this one at an affordable rate. And as I say, I do really like this book. I think the money on the revised edition of this would be well worth it. But speaking also in the summer of 1975, after those hearings, I guess, Thomas Kanza, Lumumba's ambassador to the UN and ever frustrated friend, put his finger on the error the United States had made in 1960. Quote, "The Americans believed that Lumumba was a communist because the Belgians said he was," unquote, he told the press. Quote, "The Americans did not even know Lumumba," unquote. And absolutely the case. It's a case of whatever their objectives were. As with the case of Fred Hampton, they shot themselves in the foot by killing these men. It's really sad. So then I think that this paragraph by Reid really sort of sums up what anybody feels who has delved into all of the materials surrounding the Lumumba story. It's tempting to imagine what could have been had Eisenhower shown a little more sympathy toward Lumumba. Had he rearranged his schedule so as to meet him face to face at the White House, perhaps he wouldn't have ordered his assassination. Had Hammarskjöld shown the courage to defy U.S. entreaties and allowed UN peacekeepers to protect Lumumba, perhaps he could have saved the deposed prime minister's life. Had the United States and the UN shown more patience and worked with Lumumba rather than undermined him, perhaps the Congo could have pulled back from the brink and the crisis could have abated. He's very good about synopsizing the subsequent history and showing that rule under Mobutu was not really better to U.S. interests than that under Lumumba could have been foreseen to be. Of course, you can only speculate on what might have been. Alas, we are left with what indeed happened. I think that Stuart Reid's book is an excellent overview. I had a couple of little qualms. And he writes, speaking of Hammarskjöld, the cause of the crash that killed him and all 15 others aboard would never be determined. The plane carrying Hammarskjöld famously went down, and he says the cause would never be discovered. That's a big overreach on the author's part. It has not been discovered. It has not been determined. He goes on to say, Occam's razor suggests that the most likely explanation for the crash is that Hammarskjöld's plane went down for the same reason most planes did in 1961, as a result of pilot error. Hammarskjöld's plane was the 6th DC-6 to crash that year. It was not the first serious aviation disaster for the UN operation in the Congo, nor would it be the last. In all likelihood, there was no hidden meaning or sinister machinations behind Hammarskjöld's death, just the cruelty of chance. You know that I am a big fan of the writing of Susan Williams. This was the first book of hers that I read. And she asks the question, who killed Hammarskjöld? She does not answer the question in the book. She indeed does not have a clue who might have done it, but she lays out the available evidence quite convincingly enough to make it seem very likely that that plane did not go down via natural causes. It looks like there may have been another plane which took it down. He even poo-poos the bragging of somebody in a bar years later. Well, this is a great book as far as understanding what is known. And it's quite shocking how there can be secrets in international relations that need to be kept secret beyond a single generation. But such things have occurred. And I think this book is rather convincing. Another book, he makes mention of this book in his bibliography, and he also makes mention of her book, White Malice, which I read. And I think I did a review of, or something on this channel. He did not cite this book in his bibliography, and I think that the lack shows the presence of uranium in the Congo is more of a big deal than anybody wants to be generally known. So this book goes a long way towards explaining the sort of frenetic mindset of foreign policy makers in the region at the time of the independence movement. So I would actually highly recommend this book as sort of a precursor of introductory material to the studying of Congo independence. So I will just show you some other books. Of course, this is Lumumba's own writings. This, at the time that I bought it, was one of the highest prices I ever paid for a book. And I think I've read good portions of it. There is another book of writings by him, Congo, My Country, and it looks like a photo from when he was being, led to his ultimate demise. Yeah, the glasses have been removed. And interestingly enough, I just noticed it today. The foreword is by Colin Legum. Sounds like a vegetable or something. And I have another book that I picked up, which I've never looked at. It's another one of these little penguins. And this has been rebound into a library edition, but withdrawn. And it was always considered something that I would read. And possibly, if I ever revive this project or get my reading up to speed, I will look at it. So that's why I'm holding on to it. Given that there are so many interests in the tale of Patrice Lumumba, I think that you still are quite likely to find important clues in an old book such as this. You know, Penguin used to do all kinds of nice little books. In fact, the other one was a Penguin too. Where is it? I would love to have their African series. When I was doing the play about Kenyatta, there was a marvelous, and I'm pretty sure it was Penguin, a marvelous book about the pipeline system of concentration camps set up by the British during the emergency, I believe it was called, or the Mau Mau crisis, as they called it. And to this date, my copy of that book was falling apart, and eventually I just lost track of all the scattered pages. And now, with the internet accessibility, if I knew the title, I could find it and repurchase it. And I would love to do that, just to have that in hand to revisit the whole theme of these British concentration camps. I'm sure there are newer things written, but I am constantly aware that there are hidden hands, if you will. I made mention of these hidden hands in my first book, actually, Embodiment and Release, the very last poem, that are sifting irredeemably, I think that was the word I used, these materials that ultimately make up our history. So all of this is important. This is a book, and in the Lumumba plot, when the congressional committee decided to revisit everything, somebody told Larry Devlin. Larry Devlin was preparing to just lie about everything, and they said to Larry, they said, oh, the Congress or the Senate, they have everything. They have all of the cables. And so I'm guessing that this book pertains to some of that. This is, I just checked, from 1980. And this is just, I was in some small town somewhere passing through, and there was a library sale, and I picked this up. It was nothing that I would ever have found in my attempts at research. So sort of serendipitous, but I have not read it because the project did not come off the ground. Oh, I thought I would just show you this because I mentioned it in my last video. Back in the day, you could not get information about stuff, and this was the best I could do as far as when I was young, trying to learn about Africa. How can you cover Africa in something this size? But it was a first attempt for me, and what is it? J.D. Fage did the atlas of African maps, which was so critical at the time. Now, this, I don't know anything about this, but Ann Novella, a fellow booktuber, mentioned this one and said it's a must read. And I was just flipping through it, and it seems that it does largely discuss the period of Patrice Lumumba. So it is something that I hope to read one of these days. Of course, I managed to pick up some books about Tshombe, and I have not read these either because the project, as I say, fell apart, and so there was no need. But if it ever revitalizes, I have them here. I don't know that there have been any newer treatments about him. Now, last year, I think it was, I read Kwame Nkrumah's Neocolonialism, a book that I recommend, a book, in fact, that Susan Williams recommends. And I I intend to read his view of the challenge of the Congo, as he phrased it. What was the other one? The crisis of the Congo. Those sorts of titles abound. So I think he's a wonderful writer, and so if I read something next about the Congo, it will probably be this one. And some other books. Whoops. I think this is a Grove Press. And actually, Reid relies on a lot of material in this book for his narrative. I'm sure I've read that. We're talking a long time ago. And this also dealing with the independence period, and this also. So I've read all of those. And this, I am not really sure. It looks untouched to me, and I didn't realize I had it. So it must have been something that came out more recently, and I just picked it up because I have this collection, and because just in case. So I don't think I will be revisiting any of this material anytime soon. And I don't know if I showed you that one, another one. And this last one is a little bit of an oddity. This is an event, I believe, after the death of Patrice Lumumba, and it looks like it's been novelized. But as I say, I was flaying in every direction, trying to find material that would help me to shape this prospective play that I wanted to write, which never came off the ground. So that is the tip of the iceberg as far as my whole collection of Congo books, some of which are in the basement and others of which deal with other periods, the whole period of Leopold and the whole period of Belgian rule or ownership, if you will, prior to the independence movement. So I don't know if that has given you, the viewer, any thoughts or ideas, but I do, as I say, recommend this book as a place to start. You cannot look for, as I say, a hagiography of Patrice Lumumba in this book. He portrays Lumumba as something of an erratic individual. It would have been nice if Lumumba had had the composed statesmanship of an Abraham Lincoln. But I think we have to acknowledge that the entire situation out of which his brilliance flowered was wholly unlike anything that Lincoln had to deal with or face. Lincoln arose from a stable situation of many years, despite the fact that that things were falling apart and had been barely held at the seams for decades in anticipation of the Great Civil War. But for Lumumba, everything in advance of his time on the public stage tended toward dissolution, and the Belgians and even the CIA operatives and even the U.S. embassy personnel were actively trying to undermine everything that he did. So I will leave this little talk here, and thank you very much for stopping by my channel.